This sermon is dedicated to the ministers meeting in Tulsa this weekend who are trying to find a way to serve God's people in difficult circumstances. It's dedicated to Rod Meredith and the Global Church of God, who are following their very best lights and doing a work in a tradition that is very familiar to all of us. It's dedicated to the leadership of the United Church of God, AIA, who are following their best lights and organizing themselves to serve the Great Commission of the Church of God. It's dedicated to Ray Wooten and the Birmingham Church of God, the Birmingham United Church of God, who came up really with the idea of a service ministry before I did, and they're pushing ahead with all the resources that they have available to them to do that work. Most of all, it's dedicated to all the little community churches who are blazing new trails, trying new ideas, overcoming setbacks, and generally serving God and His Son with the meager resources that they have. They know that all of our resources don't mean very much anyway. It's the blessing and power of God that is the only resource that means anything. And this sermon is for everyone who is trying to get something done in the face of opposition. Years ago, I read a book by Robert Townsend who opined that if you had found a way whereby you could eradicate pollution in every state of all the 50 states and all kinds of pollutions for 50 cents per state, the smart thing for you to do would be to use your own money and just go do it. Quietly and unobtrusively, get it done. He said, because if you made an announcement, and if you disclosed to the world at large that you could do this and that you had found this way to do this, there would be an entire army of obstructionists interfering with everything you tried to do. And I verily believe that it's true. There will also be another army out there trying to improve on what you were doing, maybe cut the cost still further from 50 cents a state, and in the process of all of it, actually seeing to it that nothing substantive ever really gets done. I once listened to a tape, I think it was Earl Nightingale, as I was driving down the road one day. I remember when I heard it, I was in my car, and I was so struck by what the man said. He said that often in life, a person will find himself with a new idea, a new concept, a vision of something, some driving thing that wants to push him on toward the future, and he sets out to do it. And the people who obstruct him the most are the people who are closest to him. His own family, his own friends will oftentimes be the ones who jerk the rug out from under him or cut his legs off while he's actually out there trying to do something meaningful in a meaningful way, or to actually build a new business or advance a new idea or sell a new invention or whatever it is he's trying to do. People in his own family will pull him down. It's odd, I think, but rising above your level is threatening to the people around you, and some of them will try to hold you down. I caught a head nodding or two in here a minute ago, which suggests to me that you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you do, at least. You should know, however, that those people who are doing that do not realize what they're doing. And there is no reason for you to tell them what they're doing. It will only make things worse. Just take your 50 cents and get out there and get the job done is the best advice I can give to you. Women may face this problem more often than men. You have heard, for example, the expression uppity women. You don't very often hear the expression uppity men, do you? But women do face this problem. However, it's a big mistake for women to assume that they are meeting opposition because they are women. Far more likely is they are meeting opposition because they are trying to do something. That's what generates the problem so often in so many people. And you should also know this before I enter into the main substance of what this is all about. There is pain in drawing away from people who are pulling you down. There is pain in it, but there is no alternative if you want to grow. If you expect to grow, if you expect to produce anything, you will have to draw away from people who are holding you back or who are holding you down. Now, there is a man in the Bible who is the archetype of all obstructionists. You may very well not have heard of him. His name may fall strangely on your ears. Actually, there were two men, and I'll come to them in just a moment. You may never have heard of him, but he serves as a foil to the man who is the archetype of all those who win over obstructionism. The ones who overcome it, the ones who have a vision, the ones who have a dream, an objective, a goal, and who strike out for it and who pursue it all the way to the end and succeed in spite of all the obstructionists. This man is our model. He's the archetype. He's the one that we can serve to imitate. Now, the story that I'm going to bring to you from the Bible today is really very simple. And it's a story that you can easily teach your children. If I had a son who was growing up in the world today, I would probably try to go through this story with him at least once a year. I don't want to bore him with it, but I would want to be sure that the principles in this were drilled into his consciousness and into the very fiber of his being. I would like for him to grow up not remembering a time when he had not heard of these two men and of the significance of what happened with them. The story is lesson number 1 for people who hope to win at whatever it is they're going out to do. It's told in chapters 2, 4, and 6 of the book of Nehemiah. Now, I want to go back to chapter 1, first of all, to lay a little historical groundwork, and maybe we could even say the story begins in chapter 1. And so it's chapter 1, 2, 4, and 6 of the book of Nehemiah. In chapter 1, verse 1, it says this, "The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hekeliah, and it came to pass in the month of Chislew in the 20th year, I was in Shushan in the palace." He was a captive. He was a prisoner. And as oftentimes happens with prisoners, he found a job. He was the cupbearer for the king. He was the wine steward, actually, in fact, for the king. He got to taste the wine before the king got it, so that in case anybody was going to die from the wine, it would be him and not the king. He said, "Hanani, one of my brethren, came, and certain men from Judah, and I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped and were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem." He is over in Persia. He's wanting to know what's happened in Jerusalem because these people have come from there. "And they said to me, The remnant that are left of the captivity there in the province are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. It came to pass that when I heard these words, I just sat down and cried, and I mourned certain days, and I fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." It hit him like a ton of bricks. Looking back after all these hundreds and thousands of years, it's hard to appreciate what these people had gone through. But their whole life had been torn apart. Their city had been taken, and the walls had been broken down. The gates made of wood had all been burned. And the people who had left behind there had no defenses. They couldn't protect themselves against the ravages of people round about them. And there wasn't a lot of law. You remember the old statement down here in Texas. They used to say that there's no law west of the Brazos and no God west of the Pecos. Well, it was about like that around Jerusalem at that time. There was no protection, no one to take care of them. And when he heard the story, it just broke Nehemiah's heart. And he sat down and he said, "I beseech you, Lord God of heaven, the great and terrible God that keeps covenant and mercy with them that love him and observe his commandments. Let your ears be attentive and your eyes open, that you may hear the prayer of your servant that I pray before you now, day and night, for the children of Israel your servants. And I confess the sins of the children of Israel which we have sinned against you. Both I and my father's house have sinned." There's an interesting parallel between his prayer and that of Daniel in chapter 9, is these men who, by the standards of the time and by the standards of all around them, were respected. They were righteous. People looked up to them. But he doesn't bat an eye as he goes into the prayer. He said, "I and my father's house." And of course, then he reaches out and includes all of Jerusalem into it and says, "We have all sinned. And we've just turned our backs on you. We've ignored your commandments. We have dealt very corruptly against you. We have not kept the commandments, the statutes, or the judgments which you commanded to your servant Moses. Remember, I beg you, the word that you commanded Moses, saying, If you transgress, I will scatter you abroad among the nations." Well, it had happened. They had transgressed. They had been scattered. "But if you turn to me, and if you keep my commandments and do them, though there were of you cast out to the uttermost parts of the heaven, I will gather them back from thence." Wow. Remember your promise. You said you would scatter us. But you also promised that if we would turn back to you, you would take us back, even if we were scattered out to the outermost parts of the heaven, which Nehemiah couldn't have even imagined that anybody would go out there. And yet, in a figure of speech, he spoke of it. And now we live in a time when it's all really quite possible that somebody could have been shot off into the outer reaches of the heaven and would have to be brought back from there. The thing that is so striking to me as the prayer goes on, and I won't read all of it to you, is he begs God to look upon them, to consider their plight, and to bring them back out of captivity. The point to remember is that Nehemiah was motivated. He was very strongly motivated. He cared deeply about what was happening to his people in Jerusalem. He wept over them, he prayed, he fasted, and very much had his heart in what he is doing. And I will say this to anyone who is moving ahead in life. Anyone who has a goal and objective, and if you're beginning to find yourself with opposition beginning to show up to it, we're going to find out very shortly whether you really care, whether you really are motivated as this man was, whether you really do have what it takes to go on with it. Because in this particular case, the motivation, the caring for his brethren in Israel, and his ability to keep his eye focused on what he was doing and his hand to the task was the difference between winning and losing for Nehemiah. So motivation, desire, caring is the primary thing. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. In the second chapter of Nehemiah, we come to the story continues as Nehemiah, being the cupbearer for the king, is serving around the table and he's cast down. He's been fasting. He probably doesn't look very good. His countenance is down. And the king looks at him and says, there's something going on here with you, Nehemiah. What's happening? And it scared him because the king could speak the word and he was a dead man. He was property, as it were, of the king. But oddly enough, this regent had come to like, I guess, his cupbearer. He had noticed him enough to know the difference in whether he was happy or whether he was down. And no king ever wants a wine steward coming around who's down in the dumps and looking miserable all the time. And he inquired, and he found out from Nehemiah what it was that was troubling him, how that he wanted to go back and to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and to rebuild the city and to do it. And the king cared enough about him to say, I think you ought to do that. Gave him letters, gave him instructions, gave him authorization, even authorized a way in which he could get the materials he needed from the king's forest in order to rebuild all this stuff. What happened here is an absolute miracle. That God heard his prayers. God saw his fasting. God saw his tears. And God said, I'm going to help him. And he moved the heart of a king who had all the power anyone ever needed to have to do something for his wine steward because he asked. It's startling and amazing to consider. So he gave him the letters, gave him some soldiers, some captains of the guard, and sent him back home to do the job. The real story begins in chapter 2 and verse 9. Then I came to the governors beyond the river, and I gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. Now, this is something that's worth taking a moment to stop and think about. These two men, Sanballat and Tobiah, men that you may well never have heard of before today, or if you just happen to read through the Bible, you read about them, they were bad guys, and you promptly went on and forgot them. They really are a useful model, a useful archetype for you to study about the role and the function and the work of the obstructionists of this world. Because I will guarantee you that you have met in your lifetime Tobiah and Sanballat in one way or another and at one level or another. They are there at all times, and the more energetic you have been at pursuing a goal, an objective, or something important, and the more important it has been, the more likely you are to have met these two men, or at least their sons or daughters, or the people who have the spirit that connects with these two men. Why would it have grieved them that someone had come to seek the welfare and to look after these poor folks down in Jerusalem? Now you visualize this. These fellows, from all indications, lived toward the north, up more towards Samaria. And Jerusalem was just a wrecked city. There were a few scattered Jews who lived in the ruins of the city and in the environs around the city. There were Jews, of course, living right up and down through this area. There were Jews living next door or nearby, Sanballat and Tobiah, we learned a little bit later. But in particular, there was this group who were living in Jerusalem who were really downtrodden within the land. And somebody comes back to kind of consider their welfare, to protect them, and to take care of them. And these people are grieved by that. I can't help but marvel at it. But it's not uncommon in life that this type of situation will happen. What's going on here? Well, Nehemiah was a threat to the balance of power that existed in that area. These two guys were the movers and shakers. They were the big cats. They were the guys that called the shots. They spoke and everybody moved. They frowned and everybody up and down the whole coastline trembled. They were the power in this area. And another person shows up on the scene who bids fair to become in his own right a very powerful individual. It wasn't merely that he came back to set up a soup kitchen in Jerusalem that bothered them. It was that he came back to do something significant that bothered them. And that was to begin to accumulate or to pull together or to provide leadership for the Jews from one end of that country to the other who until Nehemiah's return had been without leadership in this area. Maybe we can understand a little bit why it was bothering these people. Well, Nehemiah said, I came to Jerusalem and I was there for 3 days. And I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. I didn't tell anybody what God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast I rode on. And just me and my beast and a couple of guys I trusted, we got out and we scouted the walls of this city out by night so no one would see us doing it. Now, that's interesting in a way, because he comes back over here. They don't realize exactly what he's going to do. He has come to seek the welfare and to improve the lot of the Jews at Jerusalem, and they're annoyed with that. At this point in time, apparently, they don't even realize that he's planning on putting the walls back up around Jerusalem and rebuilding the gates and making that city secure again, which signifies that it would become a power in the area again. And so he keeps initially his objectives and his goals very strictly to himself. And when you begin to see what develops in this later, you can see the wisdom of not being too quick. Not to talk about it, just simply to go out and do it. It's the advice, in effect, that Robert Townsend gave his readers of his book, Up the Organization, years ago when he said, you figure out how to do it. Don't tell a whole bunch of people about it. They'll find reasons why you can't do it. Just do it. Go build it. Put it up. And so that's precisely what this man did. Now, it says in verse 17, I said to them, I said, you see the distress we are in, talking to the elders in and around Jerusalem. How Jerusalem lies waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let's build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we no longer be a reproach. People are looking down on us. People are making fun of us. People are degrading us, and they're taking advantage of us at every turn. Let's put the walls back up. Let's build the gates, so we're not going to be a reproach among these people anymore. So I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. He finally got the right people together, not all of them. He got the right people together, and he said, here's what's happened. Here's what God has opened up to me. Here's what happened back in the palace as I prayed and I fasted. And here's how the king gave me all these letters. God's hand is in this. Let's build the building. And they said, let's do the work. Let's build the walls. Let's get started. And so indeed they did. And when Sanballat and Tobiah heard it, they laughed us to scorn and despised us and said, what are you going to do? Are you planning to rebel against the king? They couldn't believe their eyes. They thought it was ridiculous. They made fun of them. They ridiculed them as they took the initial steps. I guess the first they knew about it was people were out there moving rocks around and putting some of them on top of one another, and in absolute disbelief they looked down and says, what do you people think you're doing down here? You're going to rebel against the king. And I answered and said, the God of heaven will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build, but you have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. This is our work. We're going to set about and do it. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. He didn't make any threats at them. He didn't want to take anything that they had. He wanted to build the walls of the city, and he says, it's not your job. I'm not asking you for help. I'm not looking for anything for you. We're going to go ahead and get the job done. God will prosper us. Really short speech, isn't it? Not a lot of explanation, because frankly, when you're dealing with Sanballat and Tobiah, explanations are useless. There is no point in explaining to them. You can't appeal to logic. And in fact, while in many of us there is a desire for approval, we want people who know us and what we are doing to approve of what we are doing. But the thing that you and I have got to make up our minds to, and any of you who are planning on doing anything from starting your own business to trying to build a small local church to trying to maybe go out there and visit people door to door in their homes and to introduce them to the idea of the gospel of Jesus Christ, I don't care what it is you're going to do. You're going to want people around you to approve of what you are doing. Forget it. If God approves of what you are doing, His people will also approve. And the people who are going to criticize you are going to criticize you no matter what explanation you give them, no matter what takes place, no matter what you say you're trying to do, no matter what your good motives or anything of the sort. They are not going to be impressed with your explanations. Nehemiah kept his explanation short because, in fact, it really wasn't any of Sanballat and Tobiah's business what he was about to do. It's essentially what he says. You have no portion here, says, it's none of your business, it's none of your affairs, but out. I thought that was kind of an interesting, if blunt, approach from this man, or response to this man, of the way he went about dealing with it. Now chapter 4. But it came to pass that when Sanballat heard that we were actually building up the wall, he was angry and had great indignation and mocked the Jews. I mean, the fury begins to rise at this point. They're no longer just incredulous and disbelieving that anybody would think they could do this. Now he's becoming angry, and he's mocking them. And he spoke before his brethren in the army of Samaria. We got the army together, folks, and he's talking to his army, and he says, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Are they going to start offering sacrifice? They're going to make an end of this job in a day. Tomorrow, the next day, they're going to have it all finished, right? And they all had a big laugh up and down the ranks. Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of the rubbish which are burned? Are they going to do all that stuff? And Tobiah, who was by him, said, oh my, he said, when they get these people, if they get this thing built, if a fox ran across the top of the wall, it would fall down. So they made fun of it, ridiculed it, put it down, demeaned it, and in a sense said, what they're doing is not going to work anyway. And of course, you would think if it was not going to work anyway, why are they concerning themselves with it at all? But again, you have to understand that what we're dealing with here is a card-carrying obstructionist who has a vested interest in things not going well for the Jews. And early on, I don't think they really thought that it necessarily would. But a lot of this is bravado. Listen to Nehemiah's prayer on this, though, in verse 4. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Just look upon it, God, because there are people out there who despise what it is that we're trying to do. Turn their reproach upon their own head, and give them up for a prey into the land of captivity. Let them learn what it's like to be a captive in their own land. Let them learn what it's like to have the walls of their city broken down, those people who are going to sit there and criticize us. Turn their reproach on their own head, and don't cover their iniquity. Let not their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders. Now that's something to think about. Remember, this man had prayed to God. God heard his prayer. God gave him favor in the eyes of the king, authorization to go back there. And he was back here trying to do something for God's people at God's bidding and with God's blessing. And these people were opposing him. So the prayer seems just. Don't cover their iniquity. Don't let their sin be blotted out from before you, because these people have provoked you. They're fighting you. And indeed they were. So we built the wall. And all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. And this is where it's at, folks. You don't sit around listening to the people who criticize. You don't sit around feeling ashamed because of the ridicule and the jokes they're making about you. You don't sit around feeling sorry for yourself. You go to work. You know, it may be at certain times in life that you're going to start out on a project that's not going to work. It's going to fail. But if you listen to other people who tell you it's going to fail, if you hear their counsel, you'll never know. Do you know how you will know? The faster you get to work and the harder you work at it, the quicker you will come to know whether it's going to go, whether it's not, whether it's blessed of God, whether it's not. The answer? Go to work. Get busy. Do something. Produce. Build. Take that rock and put it on top of the other rock. It's that simple. And it's something that you do today and tomorrow and the day after, and the faster you get at it and the harder you work, the quicker you will know. And if you were wrong, and if it didn't work, the quicker you will have learned the lesson and be able to start your next great project. And I will tell you that one of these days, one of those projects will go. It came to pass that when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabians and the Ammonites, all this gang, heard that the walls of Jerusalem were made up, that the breaches began to be stopped, then they were very angry. There was something else involved in this too. And it goes all the way back to their apprehension when they heard that someone was come to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. They were afraid. Just simply afraid. They were powerful, and any change in the status quo threatened that power. And in that world, at that time, in those circumstances, threatening your power could be a threat to your life, because kings usually just didn't get exiled. They got their heads taken off. And so these powerful men were afraid of what was beginning to happen in Jerusalem. So they, in their fear, it says, they in their anger, they conspired all of them together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to hinder it. Now, they begin now to go a little bit beyond making fun of things. Now they actually make an agreement among themselves, because there are several heads of, tribes or gangs involved in this thing. And so they began to pool their resources together and make plans and organizational plans to be able to pull this gang together to be able to go down there and stop what's about to... They're going to go to physical violence now. Nevertheless, we made a prayer to our God, and we set a watch against them day and night because of them. So they have to start now doing something they weren't doing before. They have to keep watchers out all the time. And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of the burdens is diminished, and there's a lot of rubbish, so we're not able to build the wall. We're running into problems now because of the rubbish and the rubble that's around here, and also because we're having to keep a watch. The amount of work we're actually able to produce is beginning to drop off. Our adversaries said, they're not going to know until we're in the middle of them to kill them and cause the work to cease. Visualize, if you will, you have the walls that have been broken down, and there is rubble everywhere. Big pieces and chunks of rock. And lots of places where an adversary could hide. They can creep up there in the night. They can be a few yards away from you. And the next thing you know, they're on you. And so it was a frightening situation that they faced. And it was making it very difficult because of the number of watchers that had to be out there. It came to pass that when the Jews who lived near Tobiah and Sanballat came, they said to us 10 times, from any place you go out there, you're at risk. Any place you put your foot, any corner you turn, you can be facing these people. So I sat in the lower places behind the wall, and on the higher places I even set the people after their families, and with their swords and their spears and their bows. And I looked and rose up and said to the nobles and the rulers and everybody else, don't be afraid of them. There is a key. There's one of the most important things to learn. If fear comes upon you, make your preparation. Don't stop your work, but make your preparations and go ahead. One of the reasons why people will fight against you, one of the reasons they'll pull you down, is because they are afraid of you. And if they're afraid of you, why should you be afraid of them? Get with the work. Go ahead, he said. Remember the Lord, who is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren and your sons and your daughters and your wives and your houses. And it came to pass, when our enemies heard that it was known to us, and God had brought their counsel to nothing, that we were able to get back to work on the wall, every one of us. They never came up. As soon as all these fellows found out that they would be resisted, they didn't even join the fight. Because at heart, people like this are cowardly. They're afraid. They're afraid to tackle a project like the one you're about to do. They're afraid to go down the road that you're trying to go down. They're afraid to put their shoulder to the wheel and go forward. And they're afraid of what may happen if you succeed in what you're doing. They are fearful people. And so here are these people. They get their armies together. They probably outnumber the people in Jerusalem. They have the tactical advantage. But when they know they are going to be opposed, they give up. Just give up. It came to pass from there on out that half of my servants worked in the work, and the other half of them held the spears and shields. The bows and the habergeons and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. And I love this verse 17 and 18. They which builded on the wall, and they that bear burdens with those that carried, every one with his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand they held a weapon. They didn't stop work. They never stopped work. They had a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other hand, but they did not let themselves be deterred from building the wall. This man had a singleness of vision and a singleness of purpose that we ought to envy and we ought to imitate with every fiber of our being. If we know what it is we want to do, and we have a passion for it, and we care about it, we need to put our shoulder to it and we need to work at it. And we don't need to let people scare us out of doing it. We don't need to let people distract us from doing it. We don't need to have people have us stopping doing the work and then go off and have to defend ourselves against this, that, or the other thing. Whatever you do, you keep doing the work. For the builders, every one of them had his sword girded by his side, and so he built. And he that sounded the trumpet was by me. And so I said to the nobles and the rulers and the rest of the people, the work is great and large, and we're separated far from each other upon the wall. My, that kind of makes me think of what's happening to us even today in the churches. You know, it's the work. There's a great and a large work to be done. And we're separated upon the wall. We're a long way from each other, all the way up and down it. But each one of us can work where we are, and we carry our weapon in our hand, which in our cases is going to have to be a spiritual weapon, and we get on with it. In what place, therefore, you hear the sound of the trumpet, resort there to us. Our God will fight for us. So we labored in the work. Half of them held spears from the rising of the morning until the stars came out at night. And likewise the same thing I said to the people. Let everyone with his servant lodge inside of Jerusalem, that in the night they may be a guard to us, and labor on in the day. Sleep with a guard, labor through the day. So neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of us put off our clothes for anything except to wash during this whole period of time. Dedicated, focused, going to do this job come hell or high water. And so it is that they went to work every day with a sword in one hand and a hammer in the other, and they got out there and they did the job, and at night they slept in their clothes in case they had to fight for themselves through all this period of time against this bunch of jackals who were trying to hinder them in doing the work. Chapter 6. Now it came to pass, and here's where things start getting a little bit interesting and a little bit tricky, because the adversary, generally speaking, when he's defeated on one field, does not give up. You should also bear in mind a scripture that I haven't mentioned yet in this sermon. There's the one that says, you need to remember, brethren, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against wicked spirits in high places and principalities and powers, that there's a spirit world out there, and it doesn't give up and it doesn't get tired. Don't ever assume that physically you will be able to outlast, endure, overcome the spirit world out there, because of that you are not capable. But God is capable, and God can see to it that you win. Now it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah heard that I had built the wall, and there wasn't a breach left anywhere in the wall, although at that time I had not set up the doors upon the gates. We had not actually gotten the wooden gates put up. That Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, come over here and let's meet together in one of the villages in the plain by Ono. In other words, let's have a parley here. We want you to come down and visit with us. But they thought to do me mischief. So the next step along the way is espionage. It's dirty tricks. It's let's get this guy out of Jerusalem where we can get at him. And I sent messengers to them, and I love this verse. This is one of my favorite verses in all the Old Testament. And it's been kind of a mantra to me down through the years. You know, I had the blessing of teaching Old Testament survey for nearly 7 years in England. I had to go through this every year with the students. But this verse was always a high point for me. I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it to come down to you? You want to talk? I can't leave. I'm sorry. I can't come down and talk. I am doing something more important than talking. I'm building, I'm working. Yet they sent to me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them every time in the same way. Why should I leave the work that God gave me to do and come down there to talk to you people? Talk is cheap. Then sent Sanballat his servant to me in like manner the 5th time with an open letter in his hand, wherein it was written, it is reported among the heathen, and Gashmu says it, that you and the Jews think to rebel, for which cause you build the wall, so you can be their king according to these words. And not only that, we have heard, ever hear that kind of expression before? We have heard that you have appointed prophets to preach of you at Jerusalem, saying, there's a king in Judah. And now we're going to report it to the king according to all these words. Unless you come down and let's take counsel together and let's talk this over. Now, what a slimy technique. They begin to trot out the rumors, and they quote Gashmu, whoever in the world Gashmu is. I suppose he was somebody whose word was trusted. Somebody that, well, everybody will believe this if Gashmu is saying it. It has to be true. But it wasn't true at all. He said, I sent to him saying, and then, notice how the length of this explanation. There are no such things done as you say, but you feign them out of your own heart. That's it. No explanation. That's something a person would really do well to notice. No explanation, no defense. It isn't true. There's no such thing. You feign it out of your own heart. For they all made us afraid. The objective of what they were doing was to make us afraid, so our hands would be weakened from the work, that the work would not be done. And here's another prayer. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. What's the objective of all this? It's to weaken the hands from the work so the work doesn't get done. I mean, the machinations that Satan has got, the devil has got, the obstructionists of the world who do it as easily as they breathe because they don't really understand what they're doing, have more ways, more angles, more little things that they can trip you up with, more things that they can distract you with, pull you off to one side, get you involved in discussions on this and counsel on that, and how we can talk and we can talk and we can talk and we can go on talking, and while we are talking, nothing is actually being done. Afterward I came to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mahatabeel, who was shut up, and he said, look, they're going to try to come and sneak in here at night and kill you. He said, let's meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let's shut the doors of the temple, for they're going to come to kill you. Yes, in the night they will come to slay you, so we'll be safe in the temple. There are doors there, there are walls there, and they're thick and so forth. Let's go hide in there so these people can't get at you in there. I know you better stay awake tonight because they'll be creeping about. And I said, do you think a man like me is going to flee? Another one of my favorite lines out of this whole section. Should a man such as I flee? What kind of a person do you think I am anyway? You think I'm going to run from these cowards? And who is there, being in my place, would go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. This is a person that was close to him, supposedly. And comes in there and starts weakening, he wants to see his knees tremble, I guess. He's afraid. He may be afraid and begins to try to transmit his fear to him. And this happens. This happens. Sometimes even among your friends and among your family. They are afraid, and without really realizing what they're doing, they start transmitting their fear to you. And he said, don't you understand the responsibility that I have? I don't know that this is altogether saying I'm the kind of a man that I am is not going to flee. I think in a sense what he's saying is a person who is in my position, if I expect to continue to have any leadership over the people of Israel at all, cannot be seen as a coward, and I can't go hiding myself in the temple because it's not right. I should not be in there. I won't go. The strength of the man, the single-mindedness of the man has got to be admired. And I'll tell you something else, not only admired, it ought to be imitated. It ought to be imitated by us in our life when we do find a vision. Sometimes we have a hard time finding the vision. Sometimes we have a hard time getting to the place to where we have the passion. But when we do have the vision and we do have the passion, we'd better start turning our back on the people who will weaken our knees and weaken our hands and cause us to be afraid. Get on with the job. Put another brick on the wall. Lay some more bricks. Put another course up there. Make some more mortar. Do something that's going to build something. Stop trying to tear stuff down. And don't let people deter you from the work. I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me, for Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. The guy was a prophet. Supposed to be. He was supposed to be a man that God spoke to, and he would come to him and say, yeah, I'm a prophet of God. God's told me this. You can come in here. And he says, he didn't do that. Sanballat and Tobiah had hired him. And he was hired so I should be afraid, and I would do this thing and sin. Why? So they would have a matter for an evil report, so they could reproach me. There's somebody out there looking for an evil report to reproach everybody who is really working hard to try to serve God. And that's why in the initial part of this, I talk about all those people who are trying and working and trying and working, and they're going to face opposition, and people are going to be trying to cut their legs off every time they turn around. And they ought to go right ahead with what's ahead of them. They ought to work at it. But people are going to try to bring up evil reports and to reproach people, and in the process, they're going to hinder the work of God. And it's even possible for people who think they're trying to do the work of God to hinder the work of God in their own work by the way they work, the way they deal with other people. My God, look on, think about Tobiah and Sanballat according to these their works, and the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who would have put me in fear. Intimidation, fear tactics, little hints, little threats, little things tossed back and forth, sinister little remarks that people like to make, all of which are carefully crafted to create an atmosphere of fear. And I will tell you something, the work of God does not prosper in an atmosphere of fear. If you're going to be afraid, you might as well go out and dig ditches. You might as well go sell real estate, go sell insurance, go get some job in the world, although you're going to have your troubles there if you're afraid. That the righteous is bold as a lion, and the wicked flee when no man pursues. The fear is the thing you've got to watch out for. So the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month, Elul, in 52 days. Took all 52 days for all this stuff to be going on. And it came to pass, when all our enemies heard it, and all the heathen that were around us saw these things, they were much cast down in their own eyes, for they finally perceived that this work was wrought of God. Imagine that. Can you imagine yourself in a position of having resisted somebody and struggled with somebody and criticized somebody and passed rumors on about somebody down along the line, only to find out that God really was behind it after all? I don't know how you'd feel, but I'd feel rotten. And I think I'd be on my face before God, realization that I had been in opposition to something that he was actually behind. They were much cast down in their own eyes when they came to realize that they had actually been fighting against a project that God had been behind all along. But it didn't even end here. After this comes the politicking. Listen to what it says. It says, moreover, in those days the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came to them. They were still communicating back and forth with these people. And there were many in Judah sworn to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Era, and his son Johan had taken the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah. There were all these marriages and alliances and people swearing to one another. And they reported his good deeds before me and uttered my words to him. And Tobiah still kept sending letters to put me in fear. And you know, apparently, it just never, ever ends. And if you're going to do anything, if you're going to accomplish anything, you've got to make up your mind to the fact that it's never going to end. And you've got to put your hand to the plow and not look back and get on with the job at hand and do what it is you've got to do, regardless. It's not going to end. But in the end, the people who win are the people who have the single-mindedness and the determination to do the work and not stop and talk to people about the work and not be put in fear and to lead them to stop work. All of the objectives that these people had were just to stop the work. Nehemiah could have been friends with all these people if he had just stopped the work. That's all. He probably could have prospered, probably could have lived like a fat cat. Everything in his life would have been just fine if he would have just stopped the work. Now, what you have seen here in this passage of Scripture is the classic archetype of obstructionism. Now, the people who get in the way, because there are two kinds of people involved in this. There are people who do the work and the people who get in the way. The people who get in the way make fun of the people who are doing the work. They belittle their efforts. These guys plan violence against them. They attempt distractions. They raise and repeat false stories and rumors and pass them all over the place about people who are actually out there doing the work. They attempt intimidation of these people because they'll be happy if they will just drop back to our level, if they'll just do things our way, if they'll just quit doing whatever it is out there that they're trying to do, or take it down a ways, or do something of that nature. It'll be all right. And they tried to create an atmosphere of fear. Always watch out for that fear. And they continued politicking even after they had lost. Long list of stuff. Now, the other man who is the archetype of the winner, Nehemiah. Two things. He never lost sight of his objective. The building of the wall and the building of the gates and the closing and making secure of this city was all he cared about. He ate, drank, slept in his clothes for it, and did it. He never lost sight of the objective. And two, he never quit working. Even when he had to hold a spear in one hand and a hammer in the other, a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. Whatever it was, he never quit working. Now, it's been said a million times in the history of man. I'll say it again to you today. If you're smart, you'll never let this get away from you. Nothing worthwhile is ever easy. And frankly, the difficulty that goes with it is almost always in proportion to how worthwhile the thing is. The more worthwhile, the more difficult. The more worthwhile, the more opposition. The harder you work at it, the more the detractors. The harder you go after it, the more fear people will try to generate, and the more threatening you are to people who aren't doing anything. There are two kinds of people who will hear this message. There are the players and the watchers. The watchers actually fall into two kinds, the people who just watch and do nothing and the people who criticize. The critics fall into two categories, the destructive critics and the constructive critics. But the real players, the ones who take the stage, there are only two roles to be played. So if you want to be a player, you got a choice of two roles. You can play the role of Nehemiah, or you can play the role of Sanballat. You can play the role of a builder, or you can play the role of an obstructionist. You know, you really ought to give, at this stage in your life, really serious thought to the role that you are playing today and the degree to which, as a player in this role, you are dedicated to the task, you are determined to see it through, you are determined to grit your teeth and go straight on through the fear and not let somebody cause you to go hide out somewhere, give up and quit on what it is that you have to do, that what you believe in is right and that you're going to pursue it no matter what. You really give serious thought to that. And I want you to turn back to Acts, the 5th chapter, Acts chapter 5, to a piece of advice that I think every one of us at this stage in God's church, and really at any stage in God's church, but it really is germane to the situation we find ourselves in the church today. In Acts chapter 5 and verse 34, and I tell you these things, I pass this on to all of you in this room and everybody out there on the tape program and wherever they are and however they're looking at the work and whatever they think about the work, hear these words. These men who, preaching of God, had really cut these people to the heart. And these people that they were preaching to had taken counsel to kill them. But there stood up one man in this council that was thinking about and planning to kill these men. They were not just going to send some emissaries around to try to scare them silent. They had already tried to scare these people silent, and it wasn't going to work. A lot of the same tactics that were used against Nehemiah were used against Peter and the others by the Sanhedrin in the first century. Putting them in fear didn't work. Scaring them didn't work. You know, if you've actually been able to pull up a man by his arm who was crippled and never walked in his life and see him go running off down the road, you're hard to intimidate. And when you can't do that, all that's left is to kill them. But one man in the council, a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a doctor of the law, who was had in reputation among all the people, and he commanded to put the apostles forth a little place. Take these guys outside. And he said to them, "You men of Israel, take heed to yourselves and what you intend to do touching these men. You'd better stop and think about what you're doing. For before these days there rose up Judas, who boasted himself to be somebody. A lot of men, 400 of them, joined themselves to him. He was killed, and all those that obeyed him were scattered, and he came to nothing, absolute nothing. After this man, well, there was another guy, Judas of Galilee, in the days of the taxing. We had a big tax revolt, and he drew away a lot of people after him, and he died. And even as much as obeyed him, were dispersed. They were scattered all over the landscape again. He didn't really accomplish anything. And now I say to you, refrain from these men, and let them alone. Just leave them alone. Get off their backs. For if this counsel or this work be of men, it will come to nothing, and it doesn't need your help to come to nothing." I think that's a fascinating statement, isn't it? If it's of men, it's going to come to nothing. What do you need to be working to try to bring it down for? Leave them alone. It will come to nothing. But if it be of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest haply you be found even to fight against God. My, what advice. Just leave them alone. As someone once said, lead, follow, or get out of the way. I mean, why fight it? Why why get in the role of Tobias or Sanballat? Why not find your own work? Why not find your own job? Why not get your own tail in gear and begin to produce something? Because that's when you'll know which side of the stage you're on. That's when you'll know what kind of a player you are. Whether you're an obstructionist who's getting in the way and may even be hindering the gospel of Jesus Christ, or whether you're someone who is a builder, one who puts things together, one who makes things happen. There is a God in heaven, I say, not necessarily, who looks down upon men, who empowers men, who confuses and scatters his enemies, who strengthens the hands of those who serve him. If you look to him, if we trust him, if we have confidence in him, we should not be trying to do his work for him, but are giving attention to our work for him.